Greetings all, and welcome to Lucas Sprues. In today's video, we'll be kicking off a new inbox review series where we have a look at various 1/72nd scale Corsairs, starting off with the Revell 1/72nd scale F4U-4 Corsair. I'll put all of my videos as I make them into a playlist, so you'll be able to see not only the inbox reviews, but also later on the build videos when they start to come out, so you can have a little bit of a comparison of the various variants of Corsairs that are available and compare some of the different brands. But without further ado, let's have a look at this Corsair. As usual, we'll have a look first at the box, then we'll have a look at the instructions to see how everything goes together, and we'll finish up by having a look at the actual plastic parts and the decals. So starting off with the box itself, on the front we have a nice painted image of two Corsairs flying through the clouds. Nothing too crazy, there's no combat going on, and these Corsairs look absolutely glistening, which I doubt many people are going to be building them as, given how many opportunities for weathering you can get with these late Corsairs. But the rest of the box is pretty typical for Revell. It's a level 3, which is a bit of a mid-range kind of point on their skill level scale. 72nd scale, we've got 65 parts and some dimensions for the kit, and a number of 03955. And on the right corner here, we have the titles of F4U-4 Corsair. On the bottom here, we've got a few little warnings and some suggestions about keeping the box in case you have later questions. I'm assuming that's for like inquiries for spare parts. We've also got some details about the trademark of the Corsair, a barcode number, and a address for Revell's website, the German one by the looks of things. On the back, we've also got some pictures of the sprues, as well as a few pictures of a finished model, and a little bit more details and warnings about this kit. Also a paint guide in the left corner, and a little picture here of some of Revell's various tools and products for assembling kits. On the top, we've got a little bit of history about the Corsair, saying that this kit is a model of the famous US Navy fighter aircraft. Special features include a twin radial engine, I'm assuming that means twin row, a detailed cockpit, which we'll talk about later, 2 auxiliary tanks, 2 bombs, a rotatable propeller, detailed undercarriage, and decal set for a US Navy version. So it appears we've only got the one scheme included straight off the bat. And that's pretty much it for the box. We've just got a repeat of the box art on the sides there. So I'll open things up and we'll have a look at the instructions. The box here is a side opener, so I'll just cut one side open and fold the opening down. And we have a bag here containing all of our plastic parts, including the clear parts, which are free to move about and possibly get scratched. So not great, but still at least it's reasonably tight and it doesn't seem anything's come off the sprue. And we've got our instructions, which if you sort of open them up, they should contain our decals. Yep, so we've got a little bit of warning or some warnings and guides here. And we've got our decals with a little bit of paper to protect them from some moisture. Taking a closer look at the instructions, as you can see, we've got a nice picture of the finished model, and whoever's made this model has decided to put a little bit more weathering than is featured on the box art, which looks pretty decent. Down the bottom here, we've got some warnings about reading the safety advice included on that extra sheet that we had a look at. And opening up the page, we have a very nice and easy to follow guide for both keys, so various steps you might have to perform when assembling this kit. And we've also got a really nice beginner-friendly sort of set of images showing how to go about making this model kit. So pretty good if you're just starting out. Turning over the page, we've then got our color guides here, along with a few more keys. We're using the Revell color codes for the numbers there, but there's also a name for each color in various languages. I have to say there's quite a lot of different languages included, although they all appear to be European, and yeah, nothing for anyone who's buying this kit in the Asian market. But otherwise, we've also got some colors which need to be mixed, such as a little bit of green and yellow to get that sort of US primer color. So they include some rough ratios for mixing those paints. Over on the next page here, we have some more advice on getting spare parts resources, and we've got our sprue map. So we've got quite a couple of sprues here, although all of them look reasonably small and quite filled. We've got sprue A, B, C, D, E, which is the clear sprues, and then F. A fair few of these parts are recycled, I believe, between the 1D version of this kit, but we've got this sprue here for the separate 4-bladed propeller and the various engine details, as well as some fuel tanks for the later Corsair. On this page here, we begin assembly, and as you can see, they've got all of it for the painting guides in color, which is really great. It's easy to see what you're painting. And you've also got some pretty clear markings for where decals are applied and various little guides up the top there. Step 1 begins with painting the front instrument panel, which appears to be molded to this bulkhead. And once you've painted and added the decals to that, you can add the rudder pedals and the gun sight. Step 3 involves building up the rear bulkhead here, which includes a pan for the seat to be attached to, and an extra little piece here which gets attached to the bottom, which the joystick can fit into. Now, this would be accurate for the early model Corsairs, which didn't have a floor. They sort of just had the seat attached to some framework, but otherwise you could drop pretty much straight to the bottom and have stuff get lost and end up further down the fuselage of the aircraft. However, on the U4 Corsair, they had a solid floor, so this is a little bit of an inaccuracy. For step 4, we're also adding some sidewall details here before you then add the instrument panel and the rear bulkhead with the seat. Step 5 involves adding another panel to the left side of the fuselage, and once you've joined those fuselage halves together, you can add this front ring piece here which has some exhaust details. Skipping along to step 6, we have the 2 wing halves, or at least there's one lower half and then 2 sections here for the upper half. And after you've added those in place, you can add the radiators. For step 8, you add the fuselage to the wings, and once those are dry, you can then add the rudder and a little bit of tail assembly to the rear of the fuselage, along with the 2 outer parts for the wings, which I'd imagine are interchangeable with their other kit, which features the British B version of the Corsair, which had clipped wings. And you've also got cannons, although I believe there's also machine guns, which were more commonly used on the late Corsairs. Next, you've got the horizontal stabilizers, which come with the elevators molded to them, which you just slide into their slot at the back of the fuselage. And then you've got the engine assembly. So you've got 2 halves here for the cylinders, and you've got a little insert pin here that you can add between them and then attach to the gearbox. And if you don't glue it to any of these parts, it should be able to rotate, and you can attach the propeller to it later on. You've got options by the looks of things for either the cowlings open or closed, although I'd imagine they're probably a little bit thick, but we'll have a look at those later. For step 12, we're adding the engine assembly to the front of the aircraft, and for step 13, we can add the upper and lower halves of the cowling and then the front section. Step 14 involves adding the upper half of the fuselage for the front section there, and then you can add the tail wheel along with the tail wheel's landing gear doors. I'd imagine you could just shut those if you wanted to have the aircraft in flight, but it doesn't appear that you have the option to. It just says that you've got to cut them in half and then glue them in the open position. Steps 18 and 19 both involve adding the hub and the wheels to the landing gear struts and then painting those up, before you then add this strut piece to each of the landing gear bays and then glue the landing gear into place. For step 23, we're joining the 2 fuel tank halves together, and we do this twice. The landing gear bay doors for the main wheels also have to be cut in half, just like the tail wheels, but once you've done that, you can then glue them in the open position. And at step 25, you're also adding these points here, which, as you can see in step 26, are the pylons for attaching the drop tanks. For step 27, there's a little bit more detail to add to the wheels in the form of this landing gear cover, and then you can add the canopy sections, which by the looks of things come in 2 halves, so theoretically you could have it open or closed as it says in the instructions. There's also this little antenna which gets glued to the rear of the fuselage, and once all of that's done, you can also add the propeller and the pitot tube. And that's pretty much it for assembly. On the back here, we've got our marking guide, which is done fully in color, which is great. And you've also got pretty clear labels for where all of the decals go. Unfortunately, we've only got one scheme included, and that's for this aircraft, which is part of a naval training unit based in Jacksonville, Florida, which instantly makes me think of a certain Good Place character, if any of you guys have seen that show. A little bit of a boring choice being just a training unit, although it is a little bit nice with that orange band at the back. It would have been nice if some other decals were included. I've actually picked up 2 of these kits, and I plan to do the aircraft that were flown by Jessie Brown and Tom Hudner. So I'll be looking into either ordering some decals or designing a couple and seeing if I can get them printed, so I won't be doing this scheme out of the box. Another unfortunate thing is that we don't get any rockets, which is a little bit unusual for a late model Corsair. They're pretty famous for being used in the close air support, or at least the ground attacking role, so it would have been nice if we had some options to equip bombs or rockets, but instead we've only got the drop tanks, so a little bit focused on this particular scheme. But it is a little bit different, so perhaps if you have done a lot of Corsairs from the Korean War and you want something a little bit different, this might not be a bad scheme, but personally I find it a little bit boring. Moving on to the plastic parts, as mentioned, we only have one bag, which I'm not a huge fan of, as it means that the parts can move around and if they come loose, potentially get damaged. And unfortunately, these parts kind of illustrate my point. As you can see, there is a bit of a nasty scratch on the right front of the windshield there. Although fortunately that seems to be all that's there, but we'll have a closer look later on. Starting off with sprue A here, which contains the main landing gear struts, which are molded up there in the corner and don't look too bad, although there is a little bit of a nasty seam line running down the middle of them. We've also got our pin here for the propeller to attach to, the upper part of the forward fuselage section, which has some pretty nicely done recessed details, although there is a bit of a nasty scratch that kind of extends from this access hatch to the front there, but otherwise doesn't look too bad. Then down here we've got our rudder fin, which is done in fabric, which I believe is accurate even for the late model Corsairs, although I believe you would have a metal trim tab, which is done quite nicely there with recessed details and raised details for the wire control cables and the little bump there. We've also got an engraved access hatch on the left there, although there does appear to be a little bit of a weird kind of spurt of plastic or like a raised scratch mark there, which might have to be sanded. Our wings here look pretty decent as well. They've done a mix of recessed details here, which look really nice for all of the access panels and panel lines. And then for the fabric areas of the wings, we've got a really nice fabric texture replicated there, which looks excellent. One complaint I've heard about this kit is it doesn't have the hole on the flap there where you could put your foot in to get up into the fuselage, which I believe was present on all of the F4U-4 models, so that's a little bit of a mistake there, which I believe is carried over from this being used for earlier models. On the inside of the wings here, we've got a copyright of 2014 for this tooling date, and a little bit more detail for the elevator and the flaps there with the fabric texturing. And we've got some raised ribbing details for the inside of the wheel well there, which don't look too bad. We've then got the inside of our fuselage half here with no detail for the cockpit sidewalls, but there are some guide marks and rails there to help line parts up. And then we've got some raised ribbing details for the inside of the tail wheel section, and some rather interesting looking parts here for the rudder or tail fin, but I believe that's just to help line up the other half here, which we can see there. We appear to have some weird black kind of oily looking stains on these pin holes there. Luckily they're out of the way, but that is a little bit unusual. We've also got our rear bulkhead here for the seat to attach to, which I'm not sure would be accurate given the fact that the later models had a floor, so I will probably be 3D printing a cockpit, as I'll talk about a bit later. We've also got options here for the 350 cals, which I believe can just get slotted into the wing half there. So you've also got included 20mm cannons, which the kit only shows in the instructions, but if you want to switch to 50 cals, you've got the parts still there. We've got various other parts here for the landing gear, which have a fair bit of flashing and some seam lines, but nothing that can't be cleaned up. And we've got our joystick here, which doesn't look too bad at all, although again, not too sure if this is accurate for the late Corsairs. Up here, we've got our landing gear bay doors for the main wheels with some very nice recessed detailing on the inside there. And on the outside, we've got a recessed panel line there, although given the fact that I don't think the tail wheel has the option to be retracted, you'll probably have to build it with the landing gear down, so you'll have to cut along that edge line there. We've got a bit of cylinder head details here, which don't look too bad at all, with a little bit of ignition wiring replicated, and that appears to be our rear part of the engine. Then we've got our seat here, which is pretty basic, but reasonably cleanly molded without any flashing or issues. And we've got some rudder pedals there, which don't look too bad either. And finally, in this corner here, we've got our tail wheel landing gear bay doors. And for the exterior of the fuselage, we've got some nice recessed panel lining with a few access hatches and even a couple of little riveting details, especially towards the front of the engine cowling. There's also a little bit of a raised bump here for the canopy rail sliding area there, which looks pretty good. And for the most part, the sprue is pretty cleanly molded. We've also got our instrument panel sidewall details. I'll probably show some pictures of the actual F4U-4 cockpit so you can see if they're accurate. But I suspect, much like a lot of this kits, especially the interior, it's probably a mix between the 1D and the U4, which isn't entirely accurate. For sprue B here, we have the lower wing halves, which again have some fantastic fabric texturing done into them, with some really nice recessed panel lines, rivet details, and even a couple of little raised edges here for the control linkages. And it looks like some really nice little bits of detail added to the lower part of the fuselage. We've also got these attachment points here for the drop tanks, and there is a little bit of flashing and some imperfections present on the edges of these parts, but nothing that can't be cleaned up. We've got some very nicely done radiator details there with a mix of raised and recessed patterns and marks on them. They look pretty good. And then we've got our main antenna for the rear of the fuselage. What looks like our gun sight, which may need a little bit of cleanup as there is a bit of a seam line running down the middle, but otherwise doesn't look too bad. And we've got part of our engine cowling there with some very, very tiny recessed rivet details, which don't look too bad at all. Next to it, we've got our instrument panel here with a fair bit of raised ribbing details for that bulkhead, and we've got recessed holes there to replicate the dials for the decals to sink into. For the lower panel here, we've also got some raised details, although there appears to be a bit of a sink mark in the middle of that one there, and that hole there I'm assuming is for the gun sight to fit into. Next to it, we've got our horizontal stabilizers with the elevators molded into them, and the fabric texturing on these is a lot more subtle, but still looks pretty good. And I like how they've done all of those little rivet details for these access hatches. And I really love the little tiny raised controls for the trim tabs there, which look really good. Next to them, we've got our front part of the landing gear doors, along with the pitot tube there, which has a little bit of a awkward fit to it. Looks like it's going to need a knife to get it out there without damaging it. And then we've got another antenna, the tail wheel here, which doesn't look too badly done. There are a few ejector pin marks and a very big seam line on that, which will have to get cleaned up, but still not too bad. And above that, we've got what looks like some sort of intake, or that might actually be the part that the control column slots into when it's attached to the fuselage floor section, or the bulkhead there. And above that, we've got our wingtips there with a bit of a more stronger fabric texture than the elevators, but that looks pretty good. We've also got some recessed details on them, and for the most part, they are pretty cleanly done. We've got our right fuselage halve here, which doesn't have the top of the tail section, but otherwise looks pretty much exactly the same. Got some really nice recessed rivet details and panel lines, and there is actually a bit more raised ribbing on the right side of the fuselage halve there, which is interesting. And it doesn't seem to have the same grease marks on all of those ejector pin marks, which looks a little bit better. And finally, we have our front set of engine cylinder heads with a similar level of detail to the other ones, although there does appear to be a few imperfections with some of those raised lines with a few little bits of plastic looking out of place. Next, we have sprues C and D, which appear to be sort of molded together as one, although if you break them off, you'll get separate parts. But sprue C here appears to have a 250 or maybe a 500-pound bomb attached to it, so two of those. Although it wasn't shown as an option to use in this kit, I guess you probably could fit it. And then we've got our main landing gear, which looks pretty good. They've fully molded the hubs so that they're see-through, and then you've got the rear part of the wheel hub there to attach to the inside there, which looks pretty good, and you'll get a lot of depth out of it. There doesn't appear to be a tire tread pattern, and there is a bit of a seam line, so the wheels may require some cleanup, or you might be tempted to replace them if you really wanted to with something like a 3D printed set, which I might do. And then we've got our fuel tanks there, which are pretty basic. They simply consist of two halves with a raised panel line kind of running along the middle there. And then we've got our attachment points for them, so nothing really too crazy here. And finally, we have sprue B, which interestingly is actually the spare parts. I thought sprue B was the other half of the fuselage and the wings, but apparently that's actually sprue F. But anyways, as you can see with this one, we've got the front of the engine cowling there, which looks pretty accurate in terms of shaping. And for our radiator, there's some very subtle raised lines there for the details, which doesn't look too bad at all. Then we've got our four-bladed propeller, which is nice so that it comes molded as a single unit. And there doesn't appear to be much of a seam line on it, which is great. We've got our gearbox part here, which has some very nice raised rivet details. And then the I think these were like filters there on the top there, look pretty good, so quite accurate. Not too sure what this piece is, but might come clear when I'm actually building this kit. Then we've got the upper part, or one of the cowling parts there, which doesn't look too amazing. There's also a little bit of flash on it, but nothing too hard to clean up. Then we've got our 20mm cannons, which are pretty basic, but seem okay. Then we've got that part of the engine which gets attached to the fuselage first, and it has our little exhausts. And for our cow flaps, we have the open and the closed ones. As you can see, the open ones are actually not too thick, which is pretty good. It may still be worth replacing them if you really wanted them in the open position, but for the most part, doesn't look too bad. So again, pretty cleanly molded, apart from 1 or 2 bits of flashing, and the details still look pretty decent, except for this part here, which is sort of a little bit basic. I'm not too sure if that's a seam line or supposed to be a raised panel line of some kind, but it does look a little bit weird. And finally, we have our clear sprues here, which, as I saw earlier, have a bit of a scratch on the front. Otherwise, though, the front windscreen doesn't look too bad. It appears to be the later type of canopy, which was flat. I've heard some people say that in this kit, the front windscreen doesn't actually fit too well to the upper part of the fuselage. And as you can see, we do have a rather nasty gap there, which will have to get filled in with some putty. Because they've molded the same piece with the early curve type, but this later flat type obviously doesn't run or sit flush with that part there, so that will have to get fixed up. I'm also a little bit disappointed in the main canopy section here, which is really thick. As you can see, it's distorted without even sort of trying to look through it. It's really, really thick, so I might actually try and vacuform a replacement canopy, or even see if I can buy one aftermarket, because the clear parts, while they're clean and for the most part scratch free, except for this part, which is probably due to it being loose in the bag with the other parts, they aren't really that great. And lastly, to have a look at in this kit, we have our decals. As you can see, they're pretty nicely done, with most of the decals all really quite easy to see and clearly printed. There doesn't appear to be any strange film or print errors on them, and they look pretty detailed. Even the small common markings that are included are pretty good. Not that there's too many common stencils, but the included main roundels there, and the orange looks pretty good and vibrant. We've also got some nice instrument dial details there, although it's probably a little bit easier to paint some of those. And yeah, for the most part, decals look pretty good. I don't usually have any issues with Revell's decals. I find them to be of pretty nice quality. Maybe not quite up there with Cartograph, but still pretty good. And definitely a lot nicer than Tamiya's ones in my experience. So that wraps up my look at the Revell F4U-4 Corsair. Now, as I've mentioned, I've picked up 2 of these kits, both from Amazon, and they cost me $43 total, including shipping for the 2 of them. So about 22 AUD for 2 1/72 scale warbirds is not too bad, especially as the prices do seem to be going up a bit. Overall, it looks like an okay kit. There seems to be a few inaccuracies here and there, a few parts that are missing, or things that could have been added that would have been nice inclusion, like the rockets and more than one scheme. But if you want a nice simple build of the F4U-4, it doesn't look too bad. You've just got to correct a few things like the fit issues with the window, and hopefully that's all. But without building the kit, it's a little bit hard to tell if you're going to have them. When I build these, I plan to 3D print some new cockpits and maybe a few other little parts like the wheels to add a little bit more detail and just correct some of the issues. And I'm also going to try and get some custom decals sorted for the Corsairs in Devotion. I have done some printing of decals myself from home, but home printers don't tend to use white ink, and obviously that's kind of the main color I'll need for the decals, so I'm going to have to get them either printed or bite the bullet and buy some aftermarket ones. I want to do custom decals anyways for other kits, so might as well try for these ones as well. Be sure to tell me what you think of this kit yourself in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like and also subscribe to the channel. A big shout out to my wonderful patrons for helping me to fund buying these kits, and also the products I use when I make them, and the time I spent making these videos. If you want to give my channel that extra bit of support, I'll leave a link to my Patreon page down below in the description. Top tier members get early access to videos ad-free, as well as extra voting powers, a shout out at the end of the videos, exclusive content, and discounts on my cults page where I put my 3D designs. That's it for this video, but until the next one, as always, take care and model on.